So while we in the West still wait for the Attack on Titan Last Attack movie to be released, it's been a couple of weeks since the 15th anniversary special magazine has been translated into English. In my previous video, I talked about the questions and answers for and by Hajime Isayama, which some of them were quite surprising, but in this next part of the video, we'll be diving into Isayama's favorite manga chapters ever. And the goated author has, of course, named 3 chapters that stand out, but what are they? Well, the first one, Chapter 71, Bystander. What does he have to say? Well, let's read what Hajime Isayama has to say. This chapter was very dull, but I chose it as my favorite one. The reason is a bit difficult to explain because it hasn't been talked about in a long time. I think in order for people to see Attack on Titan as an interesting work, there are things that are better kept quiet even if it's the truth, but it's been a few years since the end of the serialization, so I thought, well, I think it's okay to talk about it. When I drew chapter 1, the commander of the Survey Corps was a different character from Keith, who was the training instructor later on. Around the time I was drawing the volume 12, director Araki asked me at the anime staff meeting, are the commander and the instructor the same character? That's when I came up with the idea of both being the same character. The instructor Keith said, Grisha, today your son has become a soldier in volume 4, but that was actually just a line that I never thought to follow. In fact, there was no particular reason why Eren's 3D maneuver gear was broken in chapter 16, so when I used that moments later in the manga, it became like a hidden hint. There are other scenes like this one where they were not hints but later became as foreshadowings. But of course, there are also other foreshadowings that were set from the beginning. Very interesting breakdown. It's not the first time that Isayama has been influenced by the anime adaptation. As a couple of years ago, Isayama stated, with Mr. Kaji's voice acting, there seemed like there was more bluster to him, like he said big things, but there was also a weakness to him. There were nuances that didn't come across in the manga that could only come from a real voice. But it's also surprising that that wasn't the only time Isayama was affected by the anime, as the season 1 director Tatsuro Araki more or less changed Isayama's view on how he wrote Keith when it came to combining him being the commander and the instructor later on. I truly feel like that was for the best because that allows for such a really gripping and interesting backstory for Keith. But mate, who was this mysterious commander originally in the first chapter of Attack on Titan? If not Keith, then who? Isayama's second favorite chapter is chapter 42, Warrior. This is what the GOAT had to say. I put a lot of emotion into that moment. The story that a comrade was actually a Titan had already been developed in female Titan arcs, so I had a hard time revealing that Raina was actually a Titan. No matter how hard I thought about it, I couldn't think of anything. I spent 2 days locked in the studio thinking all the time, so I finally ended up exhausted and it occurred to me to casually reveal Raina, saying, I'm the Armored Titan. When I was working on the original draft, Koei Nagashi, who was my assistant at the time, was helping me copy the subplot lines of the scene into the original draft, and I remember he gasped, turned to me and asked, Isayama-sensei, are these lines correct? I felt the effect of his reaction and I was happy inside, but I still replied coldly, huh? Why'd you ask? I just acted shy and I didn't talk about Attack on Titan, even when it came to the story or how cool the characters were. So when I said, that's nothing special, Nagashi-kun may have realized my attitude and that's why he didn't push me anymore. Even other mangakas like me would also be embarrassed to mention their own fantasy stories in front of others. No matter who you are, that's just the way it is. Hajime Isayama is living proof that less is more. The fact that he spent 2 days, my dude, in a studio stressing himself out to try and come up with how Raina was going to reveal him being the Armored Titan. And at the end, he gave up and was like, let's just casually reveal it. Let's just not stress myself anymore. I thought that was the best way to do it because it was such a huge twist and I thought the guy was joking. It, in my opinion, was better in the manga because you don't have any of the music or the lighting effects or the cinematography and sound effects building up. The suspense suspense, so reading it in the manga was a huge shock to me when I first saw it. And Hajime Isayama's third and final favorite chapter of all time is chapter 100, Declaration of War. Let's read what the GOAT had to say about this GOATed chapter. When we went into Mali arc, I decided to have Eren and Reiner, who had been the face of the work until then, make an appearance. This had been decided for a long time, but as soon as we got to the meeting to discuss the planning, I said to the editor-in-chief, if I do this, popularity will go down. And as expected, from volume 23 onwards, the work's ratings was the lowest of the serialization. I felt quite uncomfortable, but it was all for the purpose of depicting the meeting between Eren and Reiner in chapter 100. I felt like I drew Attack on Titan because I wanted to depict this scene, but now I think that might have been the peak moment or something like that. I remember at the time I had a strong obsession driven by an uncontrollable impulse that I didn't even know the reason for, a kind of obsession that made me want to do something regardless of whether I win or lose, or whether I make a profit or a loss. That is perhaps the most powerful motivation that can drive a human being, as this kind of persistence is uncontrollable, whether good or bad. Once lost, it can't be regained immediately. I feel so lucky that I was able to dedicate myself to manga. At that time, I had a strong obsession with Attack on Titan, and I was so obsessed that I didn't think there was anything else I could be as obsessed with. Holy moly, there is so much to chew in this interview. First off, Isayama admitting to himself that he knew Attack on Titan would drop in popularity the moment they entered the Mali arc, but still wanted to write it because he wanted it to lead to Eren and Reiner having that conversation in the basement. I was there when the Mali arc was releasing monthly, and I remember the reactions when the manga was being released. It was the same year season 2 came out. I remember the manga fans were so confused as to who was who and what was going on. People weren't feeling the Mali arc. Yes, they liked the Reiner flashback chapter, but people were just absolutely restless and wanted to see Eren, Aimen and Mikasa. Where was Captain Levi and Hanji? Every single month people were saying that over and over again, but when it was revealed that Eren was the one talking to Falco, my gosh dude, I couldn't believe it, and a lot of the fans were really hyped. And not just the manga readers, but even Hajime Isayama himself was really hyped. As stated in this interview, he had an uncontrollable impulse to keep going no matter what. And it truly shows, as the Mali arc all the way to the War to Paradise was just banger after banger when it came to Hajime Isayama's artwork, his writing, and just overall execution. Isayama was a maniac during this time, and you couldn't stop the dude when he wrote this arc, and you love to see it. But while this chapter did get a lot of praise when it was originally released in the manga, many fans of the anime were absolutely not happy with it in the anime adaptation. Yes, it was peak, but people were complaining about the choice of music, the lack of color and saturation, and of course the CGI Shingeki no Kyojin. Me on the other hand, I loved the episode. I gave it a 10 out of 10. Overall, what a really fascinating interview from Hajime Isayama. We learned a lot about his mindset in writing his favorite chapters, but above all else, we got to understand how much hard work this man has poured into this manga. Blood, sweat and tears, locking himself indoors for 2 days just to deliver us greatness. Hajime Isayama, what a man you are. Tell me in the comments down below, what do you guys think of this interview? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Tell me. Like this video, subscribe for more Attack on Titan videos, as well as other anime updates, news, comparisons, breakdowns, rankings and more. But thank you for watching, and as always, a boy do the views, honey out.